completely done on a biased and unfair basis. As a result, actually our governor won the flip, and as a result, she speaks first in the opening statement and last in the closing statement. And we'll try to make it up to our senator. I will not refer to the candidates by their titles from now on. I will refer to them by their full names, not to be rude. They've certainly earned their titles, but only to be as simple as possible. This is Maggie Hassan and this is Kelly Ayotte, and that's how I will refer to the two candidates. So with that, I'm going to ask Maggie Hassan to tell us a little bit about herself for the first minute, and I'm going to ask them to stand when they have the opportunity to speak.
Well, thank you, George, and thank you to the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council and all of the sponsors for putting this debate on, and Senator Ayotte, thank you as well for participating. You know, here in New Hampshire, we have been working across party lines to get things done. We passed 2 fiscally responsible balanced budgets without a sales or an income tax. We're mounting a strong and hands-on response to our heroin and opioid epidemic. We froze in-state tuition at our universities and lowered it at our community colleges. And it is long past time for Washington to take the same approach. Unfortunately, what we see is a nation's capital that has been truly captured by corporate special interests who have been stacking the deck for themselves at the expense of the middle class. At the end of the day, this race comes down to whether New Hampshire is going to have a senator who always stands for New Hampshire's priorities, or a senator who continues to have her agenda shaped by corporate special interests. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, and yes, you're authorized. Thank you. You're not that authorized. Kelly Ayotte, please, a minute.
Good morning. It's an honor to be here with Governor Hassan. I want to thank you, George, for moderating this. I want to thank the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council, Jack Cuddy, all that work at the council, and the great work that you do at the Tech Village. This election is about the future of the country. It's about getting our fiscal house in order. It's about who can work together and get things done for the people of New Hampshire, like the work that I've done to address the heroin epidemic at a national level, working in a bipartisan way, to get better care for our veterans at a local level, and there's more work to be done to make sure that we have a better tax and regulatory climate for our small businesses to create good paying jobs and to keep our country safe in a very dangerous world. I look forward to answering your questions today, and I look forward to this debate so that we can talk about the differences between us. But I will continue to fight for New Hampshire to get things done and to work together and make sure that we work together to get these problems solved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's get this first question out of the way, and I'm going to start with Kelly Ayotte. Tell us what the differences are between you and your party's presidential nominee. I'm getting it out of the way. We're going to get this
Well, first of all, one thing that I certainly pride myself on is no matter who's in the Oval Office, to stand up for New Hampshire when I disagree with them. That's why when things like the government shutdown happen, I stood up to my own party on those issues. With respect to Mr. Trump, I do have some disagreements with him on issues like NATO, on how we would perhaps handle Vladimir Putin and Russian aggression, and some many other issues, but there are many issues we have agreement on. I think that in a dangerous world, we do have to handle many of our foreign policy issues differently, including the disastrous Iran agreement that I think puts that country, unfortunately, keeping its nuclear infrastructure on a path to a nuclear weapon. So certainly I will stand up whenever I disagree with things that he says for policy matters where I think that there's a better course for New Hampshire and the country. And I think also I will work with the other side too. when there are things we can work together on behalf of New Hampshire and the country.
Thank you. Maggie Hassan, how do you differ from your party's presidential nominee?
Well, thank you for the question. I do differ with Secretary Clinton. For instance, I don't support the president's proposal to close Guantanamo Bay because I don't think it protects our country's vital interests or makes it clear how we would keep terrorists from getting back to the battlefield. But I am proud to support Secretary Clinton, who people in both political parties have said is so highly qualified and experienced to be commander-in-chief. And that is one of the major differences between my opponent and myself. I think when you realize the number of people in her own party who are expert in foreign policy and national security who say that Donald Trump is unfit to be in the Situation Room with access to our nuclear codes, it really does disappoint me that she is supporting him. This is a man who says he has no plan to defeat ISIS at a time when we know we have to do more to defeat ISIS. And that's a real distinction between the two of us. Thanks.
Thank you. Maggie Hassan, the Senate of the United States, the Congress of the United States has the power to authorize expenditures, decides how much money our federal government is going to spend. The Congress of the United States has the power to tax the United States and to collect the monies necessary to cover those costs. And finally, the Congress of the United States has the power to borrow money on behalf of the United States. And the Congress of the United States only seems to be good at the last one of those three. The deficit is, the national debt is $19 trillion. The deficit is growing at a rate of another $500 billion or so a year and seems to be growing from there. Sure, governors balance budgets, but Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush were governors with balanced budgets, and they created great deficits and so on. How are you going to cut taxes or, how are you going to cut spending or raise taxes in order to, and specifically, in order to fill that gap and to create a balanced budget? How are you going to fill a gap that's as enormous as it is?
Well, thank you for the question, George. And certainly, fiscal responsibility is a cornerstone to good government. I'm proud that we passed two balanced budgets without a sales or an income tax and achieved tax cuts for small businesses in particular in New Hampshire over the last several years. And I'll continue in the United States Senate to focus on fiscal responsibility. I have a fiscal policy plan. Among other things, I support Senator Shaheen's suggestion to go to a biennial budgeting process. There is certainly a great deal we could do to make data-driven decisions in government. There are programs we could eliminate. But here's one of the major differences between my opponent and me. As we work to balance the budget, I won't do it on the backs of people who are in retirement with Medicare and Social Security. My opponent has voted to turn Medicare into a voucher program and against protecting Social Security benefits. So her approach to balancing the budget has been on the back of our seniors when we could be closing tax breaks for big oil, outsourcers, and Wall Street and achieving great savings that way, still being able, for instance, to afford a $1,000 middle-class tax break, which would really help jumpstart our economy.
And we'll talk more about this, so there will be some more time on balanced budget, but Kelly Ayotte, you're in favor of a balanced budget amendment, but that doesn't actually balance the budget. You either have to cut spending or you have to increase taxes. That's arithmetic. How are you, and what specific steps are you going to take that will result in a balanced budget if you think it's important?
Thank you, George. I think this issue is really important. You know, not only as the mother of two young children, but thinking about the future of our country. And we need to, first of all, get to a regular budgeting and appropriations process. On the budget committee, when we passed the budget, we actually passed the first balanced budget in 14 years, serving on that committee. And there's a lot more work that needs to be done to make sure that this gets to be a regular process. We need to eliminate the budget gimmicks in Washington. So not only biennial budgeting, but this baseline budgeting where the increase is already baked in the cake to start with. We need to look at every single committee I serve on. I look for ways to save money. And I've worked on a bipartisan basis on a bill. Every audit report that sits on a shelf in Washington,
I worked with Joe Manchin to put together a bill called the Duplication Elimination Act, so that we'd actually have to vote on those and get that work done to eliminate wasteful programs, eliminating programs on the Armed Services Committee, like the Missile to Nowhere defense program that was never going to get us a result, working across the aisle with Clara McCaskill on eliminating an agency, yes, that exists in Washington, that costs over $1 billion a year just to produce reports you can get online. There is a lot more work we can do. We also need to do tax reform to make sure that we are able to keep jobs here in the United States, more revenue that'll help our debt. And this is really important. Let me just say one thing. Governor Hassan is attacking me on Medicare and Social Security. These programs, first of all, are incredibly important. My mother's has Medicare and Social Security, so of course I don't want to harm my mother. But one thing I want to do is make sure these programs are there. And that means working together to come up with a sustainable path, because Medicare is going into a deficiency in 2028 and Social Security in 2034. So rather than using it as a political attack, why don't we work together to preserve these programs, to make them financially sustainable, because that is the work that I have done. That's what I'm going to continue to do, and that's how we're going to get our fiscal house in order and make sure that these important programs are there for our seniors and for retirement security.
Thank you. In that particular example, our timekeeper teared up, and because you were paying him no attention. So let's be nice to our timekeeper. I'm going to turn to Maggie Hassan, but I'm going to stay on the topic. $450 billion is roughly the deficit today. Neither one of you, while talking about process and so on, have talked about anything that would make the slightest dent, either by increasing taxes or cutting expenditures, in a $450 billion deficit. What are you going to cut, or what taxes are you going to raise that will fill a $450 billion deficit, or does it not matter?
Well, certainly, George, it matters, and that's why it would be so important, for instance, to close some of the tax breaks that already exist. Tax breaks for big oil, tax breaks for Wall Street, tax breaks for outsourcers, all of which my opponent has voted to protect. And so that's one of the major differences here. When we talk about Medicare and Social Security, which of course need to be strengthened, people have paid into those programs, they've earned the benefits, they're critical to peace of mind in retirement. We should be strengthening Medicare. Among other things we could do, we could allow the Medicare program to negotiate for prescription drug prices, and that would see tens of billions of dollars of savings. We could have millionaires and billionaires pay a little bit more into Social Security, pay year-round, while protecting middle-income earners, and that would strengthen the Social Security program. Those are not approaches that my opponent has appeared willing to take. We can strengthen both programs. We can get at our deficit by eliminating programs such as tobacco subsidies and by closing tax breaks, and that approach is just a very different approach between the two of us.
$450 billion, Kelly Ayotte. What steps would fill a gap like that, both in terms of increasing taxes and cutting spending?
I do believe that we need to do tax reform, and that does mean eliminating a lot of the loopholes and deductions and lowering rates so that we can actually keep jobs here in the United States of America. That's critical because we have some of the highest business taxes in the world that are having our companies go overseas. And if we can keep those jobs here, we're going to have more revenue. So I don't disagree that there are areas of the tax code that we absolutely should eliminate, simplify, and make sure that we have a better tax code. And in fact, I've offered ideas on that. Let me give you an example of the fraud in our tax code. Additional child tax credit, which is a refundable tax credit. If right now there were reports done that people are claiming this refund for children that don't even live in this country. If we just required when you filed it to put a Social Security number for the child that you're claiming, you saved $20 billion with that. Can you imagine? That's one example right there. So absolutely, we need to do reform the tax code. Also, when it comes to Social Security and Medicare, I feel very strongly that we shouldn't change it for those who are in retirement or near retirement. But we should work together in the way Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did. They came together with a proposal where, yes, they did raise the cap on Social Security, which I've said I'm open to make sure that we can preserve these programs going forward, make them fiscally responsible for there. for the young generation, who I often ask, they're not sure this program's going to be here if we don't work on it.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the biggest hunks of our expenditures in the federal government, of course, is for national defense. National defense spending in the United States is roughly equal to all the military spending of all the other countries of the world combined. There are a lot of questions about the efficiency of that expenditure, and we are in a very difficult time. We'll get to foreign affairs here in a minute. But in terms of the efficiency, the way we spend that money, Maggie Hassan, could you talk about that a little bit, and in particular talk about the issue of members of Congress who insist upon particular programs, weapon systems, and the like, bases being maintained for local economic reasons rather than in the best interests of our national defense.
Well, thank you, George. Look, we have to always put our nation's security first. My first priority as governor has been our state's security and the safety of our communities in the United States Senate. I will always put our nation's security first. We certainly have a number of challenges before us internationally, including defeating ISIS. So I support the military's request for a 50% increase in the budget for that particular mission, defeating ISIS wherever they are around the globe. And I certainly would support efforts to defeat terrorism wherever it is around the globe. There is certainly more we can do to help the Pentagon modernize and reform, and that should help us achieve savings over the long run. But I also know how important the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard is to our nation's security, how extraordinary the work is that the men and women at the shipyard do. I was part of a bipartisan effort when I was back in the state Senate to keep that shipyard open when the Bragg Commission wanted to close it. And it was absolutely essential to our country's defense that we do that. It's absolutely essential to our country's defense that we keep the naval shipyard open, and I'll do everything in my power to do that.
Kelly, the national defense budget is a very large hunk of our expenditures. Are we spending about the right amount of money? And is the role of the Congress to actually dictate what sorts of programs, weapons, and the like that the military should have? For example, your support of the A-10 warplane, something that the Air Force does not wish to have. Should each and every senator and congressperson have the opportunity to influence the way that expenditure is occurring?
The most important responsibility of our government is to keep us safe. Without security, you can't have freedom. Without security, you can't have prosperity. And it is really important that now, with all the threats that we face around the world, that our men and women in uniform have not only the equipment that they need, the training that they need, and things like the A-10 that support the men and women on the ground that they wanted to keep and has been important to our Army and our men and women on the ground. So yes, Congress has a really important role in oversight. And so one of the things that's critical is we look across the defense budget. We need to reform how things are done in the Pentagon. And one of the work that I've been doing on a bipartisan basis is the teeth to tail ratio has gotten out of whack. So the bureaucrats have grown, but we're cutting the ground troops. So we have to realign the resources in the way that makes sure that we have the Air Force we need, the ground troops we need, the Navy we need. And that means not more bureaucrats, but more going into really the resources on the ground. And that's what I've supported. But I'll tell you, I look for ways, when I see a wasteful program that is not giving us results, I fight to eliminate it, because I think that's important that we have that oversight function. And it's really important that we support. I agree with the governor on the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. This is something that Senator Shaheen and I work very strongly on. Our Navy needs that shipyard.
Thank you. Let's move to foreign policy for a minute. What is the role of the United States Senator in establishing foreign policy, other than approving treaties and declaring war, which we haven't done since World War II? What is, in fact, the role of the United States Senate in foreign policy? Kelly Ayotte.
A very important role. And serving on the Armed Services Committee and the Homeland Security Committee, very important in terms of making sure not only what our foreign policy decisions in making important decisions on the size of our military, our readiness, but also on issues like, for example, the Iran agreement, where we had a vote on the Senate floor on whether that agreement should be approved. I opposed it because I thought that leaving the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world with the nuclear infrastructure to get a nuclear bomb. We've now seen that they continue to test ballistic missiles that make our country less safe than our allies, and I've introduced sanctions legislation to address that. We've seen that they continue to support terrorism, and this is a big difference between Governor Hassan and I. One of the first things she did when she got in this race was endorse this Iran agreement, which I think makes the country less safe. And so we do have a very important role in the Senate in terms of these national security issues that impact all of us.
Thank you. And Maggie Hassan, could you talk a little bit about, as a governor and someone who's not been engaged in foreign affairs, what both the role the Senate is and your capacity to fulfill that role?
Well, first of all, my first job as governor has been the security of New Hampshire, and I've worked in any number of ways, whether it's putting more troopers on the road, having more active shooter training for our law enforcement, keeping our schools safe, expanding our information analysis centers so we do more information sharing. We have worked in New Hampshire to keep our state safe and secure, and that experience translates very well. Let's talk a little bit about the role of the United States Senate. One of the things we know is we have to do more to defeat ISIS. That includes increasing airstrikes, increasing special forces, strengthening moderate forces in Syria like Kurds, making sure that we're putting the kind of pressure on Russia we need to for a political resolution with Assad, and among other things, having a debate and approval of a new authorization of use of military force, which is what Congress should do to be clear with the American people about what it's going to take to truly defeat ISIS. I'm very disappointed that Congress has not done that. I am seeing that my time is up. I am happy to address the Iran nuclear
Why don't you
agreement.
take another minute and talk about the Iran nuclear deal specifically?
Okay. This is a major difference between Senator Ayotte and me. Like Senator Shaheen and experts in national security and foreign policy from both political parties, I have concluded that the imperfect Iran deal is the best way to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon, something that must never happen and will never happen as long as I have anything to say about it. The inspectors that have been monitoring this now say that Iran has destroyed 98% of its enriched uranium and destroyed 2/3 of its centrifuges. It has a much longer breakout time now, if ever, for a nuclear weapon than it would have if Senator Ayotte's approach had carried the day. Because what she is advocating for was allowing Iran to continue to work towards a nuclear weapon under the cloak of darkness. What this deal did, according to Israel's military chief of staff, was remove the single biggest threat to Israel's existence. And so you see military leaders in Israel also supporting this imperfect deal. It is the first step in many that we have to do to continue to support Israel's security and make sure that they continue to be strong and have the level of qualitative military edge that they need. But it is a critical first step in removing the threat of an imminent Iran nuclear weapon, which was what was there before this deal was concluded.
Thank you.
May I respond?
Yes, but prior to that, to responding, I'd like you also to comment on the letter you signed with other U.S. senators directed to the Ayatollah Khomeini, an adversary of the United States, that essentially said that the President of the United States was not representing our country in the negotiations with regard to this deal, and questioned whether the United States would stand behind the negotiation the President was doing. Was that an appropriate letter for you to sign, and what caused you to sign?
Well, I hope people will look at the letter because it actually laid out what the constitutional role of the Congress is in this. So the Congress actually does have a role, and we did have a vote on this. But I would like to address this, the Iran agreement. because the Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, has described the Iran deal at the time as a historic mistake, and continues to say that that agreement was a mistake because Iran gets to keep its infrastructure. So what happens that they now are legitimized in having this infrastructure? And since this agreement has been signed, there have been numerous ballistic missile tests by Iran. The only reason you needed a ballistic missile is to deliver a nuclear weapon either to your allies or to the United States. And what they have written on one of those ballistic missiles is that we must, in Hebrew, we must wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And absolutely, this ballistic missile program that has come post-agreement, the money that they've gotten, cash relief from this administration, has gone right into their military to support terrorism and undermine our interests around the world. And so this agreement was certainly much more than imperfect, allowing the largest state sponsor of terrorism to keep their nuclear infrastructure, to continue to develop ballistic missiles with no action, and to support terrorism around the world.
Well, let's stay on that topic a little bit longer. The United States has been in this odd, imbalanced, asymmetric war since 2001 with a variety of, whether you call them Islamic terrorists or you call them cult members or you simply call them terrorists. What should the United States be doing to fight this war that's so different from any other war that we have ever fought before? Kelly Ayotte?
First of all, American leadership is very, very important. And to fight this war, we have to make sure, number one, here in the United States, that our FBI, our first responders, our intelligence agencies have the support they need and the tools that they need. And we see that ISIS, not only with the land that they have captured in Iraq and Syria, so we have to have a strong military campaign that makes sure that we continue to work to defeat ISIS. And our men and women in uniform right now, as we stand here, now that the president has announced more troops will be sent there, there are 5,200 troops there now on our behalf. We should be engaging our allies in a much stronger response to have them helping us more in that effort to defeat ISIS. But we also have to deal with issues on our homeland because they're using the internet to encourage people to radicalize here, to take this here, and that means that our FBI has to have the tools that it needs to stop terrorist attacks before they occur, that we have to deal with this in terms of our counter-narrative on the internet, and there's much more work to be done both on the homeland and also in making sure that we defeat ISIS. But we have to defeat ISIS because this is a group that unfortunately is continuing to threaten us. They will continue to encourage attacks on our country, and we also have to have a strong policy to make sure that people who are here are fully and thoroughly vetted so that individuals who have traveled to Iraq and Syria can't come here to cause us harm.
Thank you. Maggie Hassan, up to 2 minutes on the topic of all aspects of addressing terrorism.
Well, we have to defeat terrorism wherever it exists on the globe. And I laid out a couple of minutes ago the steps that we need to take specifically right now to defeat ISIS. Everything from increasing airstrikes, improving and increasing our special operations forces, strengthening moderate forces like the Kurds, surging our intelligence, and finally having the Congress of the United States come together and really debate and approve an authorization of use of military force, something that I think that there was more of a spirit of cooperation and that old understanding that I grew up with, which was that politics stopped at the water's edge. We might have an approved authorization of use of military force right now. It's one of the reasons I am so disappointed that my opponent, Senator Ayotte, signed that letter to Iran, that very partisan letter in the spring of 2015, which really signaled to the hardliners in Iran that they could agitate and not negotiate in good faith because Republican senators, it was all Republicans who signed the letter, were working to undermine the United States foreign policy. That seems to me to be a major difference. Now, we do have to do more also in terms of homeland security. One of the things I've worked on as governor is making sure that we are extending our information sharing, so critical when you're looking, for instance, at homegrown terrorists. But it's also another area where Senator Ayotte and I truly differ. One of the things that we know we have to do to defeat terrorism is to make sure that we are expanding background checks so that terrorists can't buy guns online or at gun shows. And after the horror in Orlando, Senator Ayotte had the opportunity to vote to expand background checks so terrorists couldn't get guns in those places. She declined to do that. That, along with the fact that she is supporting Donald Trump for the presidency, who doesn't have a plan to defeat ISIS and has been deemed temperamentally unfit, really does concern me.
Thank you. Let's get to guns in a minute, but I have a stumper for you. For most of my life, America's foreign policy would fit on a bumper sticker. It was contain communism. And people disagreed in terms of the specific tactics, but everybody knew what America's foreign policy is. What's America's foreign policy today? And if you only want to use 10 seconds, that's okay.
America must remain the strongest economic and military force in the world and must lead like it. That means we have to maintain our military superiority, to be sure. It also, though, means that we have to be the greatest force for good in the world. That means working with our international allies and using that military might only as a last resort.
Thank you. Kelly, how would you summarize America's foreign policy? What is it today?
Well, it's not where it should be today, but our foreign policy should be peace through strength. Peace through strength was really, I think, what was advocated by Ronald Reagan. I think talking about the shining city on the hill that our country is. And unfortunately, what we have seen under this administration is our allies wonder if we will be there for them, our friends, and our enemies feel emboldened. And so we do need to stand with our friends. We need to make sure that our enemies know that when there's a red line laid, that it's addressed, or don't lay it down. And this is very important. And Iran was sent the wrong message, and with respect to this administration, when a weak deal was negotiated. And it's unfortunate that Governor Hassan supports this agreement, but it's an example where, having looked at this, having looked at the threat that this country faces, not only from Iran and ISIS, peace through strength should be where we are. But when we are perceived to be weak, unfortunately, things happen around the world. Our enemies are emboldened, and our friends feel like we're not standing with them.
Thank you. And Kelly, let's stay on the issue of guns just a little bit further. What, if any, federal gun legislation do you support, specifically talking about issues around expanded background checks for private sales and gun show sales, limiting the size of ammunition clips, the issue of whether individuals who are deemed mentally ill should have their rights with regard to guns to not be approved, and of course the question of the terrorist watch list and whether those folks should be permitted to purchase guns. Kelly Ayotte.
Well, having served as a murder prosecutor and attorney general, and having sat with victims of violence, I know this issue is very important, and having worked with law enforcement in our state. And the most important thing that we can do is make sure that we enforce our laws, and do that very, very aggressively. What I've supported is making sure that we help fix the background check system. The mental health records that are supposed to be there by law have not gotten there. New Hampshire is finally moving to do that, I believe, but it's been late to do that. And reforming our mental health system in general to make sure that it is a system that serves people and identifies issues early on. I also believe there needs to be much more prosecutions. There's an abysmal record of prosecuting gun violence crimes and also violations of our background check system right now. I worked in a bipartisan way after the Orlando shooting, to introduce legislation to keep guns from those who are too dangerous to get on a commercial flight, while also making sure that we protected the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens, which is equally important in all of this. And so to me, this is an important issue that we work together on in enforcing our laws, but also making sure we protect people's constitutional rights.
Thank you. Maggie Hassan, up to 90 seconds on what gun laws specifically you would support.
Well, thank you. I am very concerned that we still have laws on the books that permit terrorists and other people who shouldn't have guns to get them online or at private gun shows. And what you didn't hear, unfortunately, from my opponent just now is her rationale for, again, voting against expanding background checks, because the bipartisan effort that she just referred to is the very least that the Congress of the United States should have done. Yes, if you can't fly on a plane, you shouldn't be able to buy guns, but there's still this big loophole. If you can't fly on a plane, because Senator Ayotte and others standing with the gun lobby voted against expanding background checks, those same people can go online and to gun shows. And in fact, we know from the intelligence that we're gathering that ISIS knows it. They know in the United States it's really easy for them to circumvent the current laws that we have and get weapons. So that doesn't make us more safe. And it's a real concern of mine, as we know we have to do more to defeat terrorism. And we do have to do more in the very narrow circumstances in which somebody with a mental health challenge, and most people with mental illness are safe. We do not need to be limiting their rights. But when somebody with mental illness has been adjudicated to be too dangerous to themselves or others, we should have a system in place that prohibits them from having a gun too, something we have tried to do in New Hampshire now for a couple of years. The gun lobby has pushed back at us. I'll continue to stand up to the gun lobby as I have, and it's one of the major differences between my opponent and myself.
Thank you. Maggie Hassan, isn't the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, a failure? Expenses associated with health care continue to rise and rise greatly. Insurers are withdrawing from the exchanges around the country because only the sickest people, least healthy people, are signing up, and as a result, they lose money on the insurance that they cover. Hasn't this been a failure? And what would you, as a U.S. Senator, want to see change, or would you support the repeal of Obamacare?
Well, I think it goes without saying that access to quality health care is critical to everyone's capacity, not only to function, but to enjoy the freedoms and the high quality of life and to contribute in the United States. And as many people here probably know, my husband Tom and I are very aware of both the strengths and the flaws with our current healthcare system. Our 28-year-old son, Ben, lives with us. At various times, Ben has had as many as 9 doctors and 19 medications, right? So a lot to juggle, a lot of home nursing and other things. So it's absolutely critical that we address the flaws that the Affordable Care Act certainly does have, but build on the progress it has allowed us to make. We don't want to go back to a time where people with pre-existing conditions couldn't buy health insurance, or where young people couldn't stay on their parents' health insurance into their early adulthood, as the Affordable Care Act provides. One of the reasons we have our bipartisan Medicaid expansion program, something that now provides coverage to over 50,000 hardworking Granite Staters to 500 people in Conway and North Conway, is because of the Affordable Care Act. We should be doing more to allow generic drugs to get to market sooner. That would help us lower costs, and we have to repeal the medical device tax and the Cadillac tax, and also work to reward quality and not quantity in medicine. We have certain issues to address, and the last thing I'll say, I know my time is up, is that New Hampshire's exchange now has 4 insurers on it, as opposed to the one when this started, in large part because of the way we designed our bipartisan Medicaid expansion program. So yes, we have work to do, but going backwards to the way it was before the Affordable Care Act existed isn't the solution.
Kelly, you have 90 seconds, but isn't the Affordable Care Act a great success? It has.
That was very tricky.
Thank you. I am pretty good. The Affordable Care Act has cut in half the number of people who are uninsured in America. Businesses, bless you, timekeeper. He's allergic to the fact that no one's paying any attention to him. But we're balancing it. I think we're doing pretty well. Yes, nonpartisan. The number of people who are covered is grown substantially. Businesses that used to subsidize the care in their insurance policies of individuals who were uninsured now are shielded from some of those costs. Isn't this a good thing? Hasn't it been a success? Do you favor a repeal of it? Do you favor, and would you vote for a repeal of it if it were not replaced by something that was equally or better going forward? 90 seconds.
Well, I would like to say that saying that the Affordable Care Act is a success, someone needs to say that to the people that I keep meeting in New Hampshire, families who are paying higher deductibles, are paying higher premiums, and have higher co-pays, and therefore are having less access to health care. And unfortunately, the Affordable Care Act isn't so affordable for a lot of people. And that we need to, instead of having an approach that has been really driven by one-size-fits-all from Washington, there needs to be more choice and competition and options for people. And I have voted to repeal the bill. I've also voted to make sure, I want to make sure that we work together on issues that will help address big problems in this bill, whether it's changing the 40-hour work week to a 30-hour work week, which hurts our workforce, whether it's the medical device tax, which I've worked hard to suspend for 2 years. I've worked to make sure that we expand health savings accounts, which the Affordable Care Act actually shrunk the opportunities to use health savings accounts. But if we do not address this issue of costs, we're denying people the opportunity to really pick a plan that they would like. We need to have more competition. It's time for us to get the insurance sold across state lines. There is a lot more work to be done. And the answer is not the one-size-fits-all from Washington that we've had. And I know it because I've heard it from New Hampshire families, I've heard it from individuals who it's become less affordable for them, unfortunately.
Let's talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Kellyanne, who was your favorite teacher growing up, and why was that person your favorite teacher?
My favorite teacher is Mr. Lynn, who was my teacher at Bicentennial Elementary School in Nashua, New Hampshire, in the 6th grade. And when I ran the first time, he introduced me at my elementary school. So I've had a lot of great teachers, but he's my favorite.
Thank you. Thank you. Maggie Hassan, who was your favorite teacher growing up?
Mrs. Mahoney in middle school, who just had a great way of walking into a classroom and honoring the creativity and energy of students, but letting us also know that there was no way we were going to get away with anything.
No one cares, but my favorite teacher was my 2nd grade teacher, and she was beautiful. The cost of health care has not been affected by the Affordable Care Act very much. In other words, it just keeps going up and up and up. And Kelly Ayotte started speaking. Maggie Hassan, I'm going to ask you to spend a minute talking a little bit more about specific steps. And in particular, I'm interested in whether you would want to see Medicare Part B permitted to negotiate for the price of medications, pharmaceutical products.
Well, thank you, George, very much for the question. And, you know, just a bit of context here. We do have a challenge with rising healthcare costs, to be sure. We do know that the degree to which they're rising has slowed under the Affordable Care Act, which is not great comfort from time to time for those of us who are on the market. purchasing health insurance or purchasing health care. But there are a number of things we need to do to lower the cost, one of which is really making sure that we are paying for quality outcomes from healthcare, not just the volume of healthcare that's delivered, and that we're coordinating care much better. So for those of you who were at Memorial Hospital last night as they did their ribbon cutting for their new primary care practice, you saw all of that space that allows physicians and other caregivers to integrate their care of patients in a really organic way. That's ultimately the future of healthcare that will help bring down costs. A couple other thoughts.
We'll give you one more minute on it, and then we'll go 2 minutes with Kelly Ayotte.
And yes, in terms of Medicare being able to negotiate for prescription drug prices, this has been a difference between Senator Ayotte and me. We could, among other things, really save money in the Medicare program if they could do that. The VA does it. There's no reason Medicare shouldn't be able to do it. And lastly, I'll note that one of the things that is important moving forward to remember is that before the Affordable Care Act was passed, healthcare costs were going up, premiums were going up, deductibles were going up. We don't solve this by going backwards. We solve it by building on some progress, changing some things as we need to, and always working to make sure that every American has, at every Granite Stater, has opportunity to be covered, as we've done with our Medicaid expansion. Repealing the Affordable Care Act would repeal Medicaid expansion.
Just yes, no, if you would, Maggie Hassan, would you support the elimination or the permission of interstate sale of insurance policies so that each state wasn't creating its own set of rules?
Well, so here's the issue. We allow companies to come into New Hampshire and sell from other places, but they do have to follow New Hampshire's rules. And one of the reasons we've done that is because there are health insurance companies around the country who really don't have very good standards, who tend to rip consumers off, who don't cover what they say they were going to. I can still remember somebody from our Department of Insurance who went out to another state to do audits, as they sometimes do for each other, of healthcare companies to find, she said she spent 3 days in another state looking at the payment claims records for a health insurer, and finally after 3 days said, could somebody show me a claim that they paid the first time? So I don't want Granite Staters to be preyed upon by unscrupulous health insurers. We were able in New Hampshire to, for instance, pass Connor's Law, something I sponsored, which said that behavioral therapies for children with autism needed to be covered. Early intervention services needed to be covered. Hearing aids needed to be covered. That's the type of thing that state oversight makes a difference on, and it's why if you're going to have companies coming into your state to sell insurance, they do have to follow your own state's rules.
Thank you. Kelly Ayotte, I think you're up to about 3 minutes on this one.
Sorry.
If you can answer all the questions about how we can reduce the cost of health care in America in 3 minutes, that would be pretty good.
Well, first of all, we should allow the sale of insurance across state lines. And we should enforce our laws. I think we can do both. We're smart enough to figure this out. But the notion that you can, for example, go out and get your car insurance anywhere across the country, but you can't have that the insurance companies don't have to compete in a national way on health insurance is, to me, logical that we would give people more choice and we would increase the competition to have them have to compete against each other to drive prices down. Because if you talk to a small business, you know, they have very few choices here in New Hampshire. And they'll literally just shift from one to another for very little cost difference. And having done a roundtable not too long ago with a group of small business owners, all I heard about was massive increases. And they want to provide the insurance for their employees, but they're not giving the opportunity. So that's just a starting point. I think we also need, you can't have just a one-size Washington-driven and not give people the options of different types of plans that they may want to have and choose to have competition based on, you know, what is best for my family, what's best for this individual. And let me give you a story. I was at the Olive Garden and I was talking in Newmarket, talking to a young man who worked in the kitchen, And before the Affordable Care Act, he was able to get a plan. He's paying $20 a week on this plan, and it worked for him. And now, because of the Affordable Care Act, because there had to be one model from Washington, the prices went up, and he's choosing not to buy insurance because it's just, there's not an affordable choice for him, because for him, had he had a chance to decide on different plans, he would have done that. So I think that there has to be a different way with more competition, more choice, more option, and I think that's the way forward on this. Otherwise, if we stay in the status quo, the prices are going to continue to go up in a way that it just becomes unaffordable. You may say you have health insurance, but if your deductible is so high that you can't afford it, then it's essentially not having health insurance. I also believe strongly health savings accounts, we should expand them. I'm supporting legislation to expand them. Flexible spending accounts, you should be able to carry them forward in a longer period. We should look for innovative ways to help people pay for their health insurance. And so I hope we can work together on this, because this is really something that deserves bipartisan attention, and that's what I've tried to do with many of the bills I'm sponsoring on this issue.
How about the Medicare ability to negotiate for?
I'm open to that. I think the issue is that the studies are mixed of how much results we're going to get from it, and we're going to have to go well beyond that if we really want to drive down costs.
Doesn't the rest of the world pay a lot less than we do for medications, and isn't that a result of those national governments, which in general provide health care, negotiating great rates for those pharmaceutical products?
Well, one of the things, the rest of the world also, at the moment, sometimes they've been getting access to life-saving medical devices before us because of the difficulty of some of regulatory challenges within the FDA. So I think we need to look up and down our whole system to say, not only just this negotiation issue, how are we going to have more competition? How are we going to be in a stronger position? Sometimes there's regulations that come down that make it harder for us to drive down costs. And yes, let's hold companies accountable if they are misusing the system and make sure that they have to actually compete.
Kelly Ayotte, the Constitution says that the President should nominate Supreme Court justices, and the United States Senate should advise and then consent or not to the selection of that nominee or the approval of that nominee. You were nice enough to have a conversation with Judge Garland, but shouldn't you and shouldn't the United States Senate have held hearings and voted yea or nay on the candidacy of the United States President's nominee for the Supreme Court?
We lost a tremendous justice in Justice Scalia, and we're now in a 4-4 court. We're really, the balance of the court is at stake. We're also in a divided government where you have the president from one party, you have the Senate being held from another party. So I felt that the better course was really to wait for the people to weigh in this presidential election in November, where you have a divided court, you have a balanced Senate, and a difference in opinion there. And I think it's really important that we give the people the opportunity to weigh in and then go forward with this confirmation process. And I'm someone who has a record of working across the aisle. I'm someone who's voted to support many of the nominees, the judicial nominees under this president. And so I think that is the better course, and that's why I've supported that as a way to go forward.
If you keep the microphone a minute longer, or however long you need, I shouldn't say that, a minute longer. Isn't it horrible that the United States Supreme Court, isn't it horrible that the United States Supreme Court is divided 4-4, that we have a Supreme Court that instead of being a Supreme Court, a set of judges evaluating our laws, are in fact ideologically divided 4-4. How can we change that?
Well, I think that, I hope we can change that by making sure that the people that are put on the court, that it's not some kind of ideological mission for them, but they're going to actually interpret the Constitution and the laws as they are and how they're drafted, and have respect, obviously, for the legislative branch in terms of how they interpret that. So I think that's part of the role, obviously, of reviewing the qualifications of someone in the role of a senator. But there's no doubt that certainly if you look at where the court is, there is an ideological draw right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, that was just me on a little bit of a rant. Maggie Hassan, could you talk a little bit about how you, as a United States Senator, would address the issue of approving nominees, particularly if they come from a president of the opposite party, and what your roles and responsibilities are there, and your willingness to take action, and how do we make our Supreme Court a non-ideological body?
Thank you for the question, and this is an area where Senator Ayotte and I have significant disagreement. The Constitution of the United States says that the President shall nominate a candidate to be a Supreme Court justice, and that the Senate shall advise and consent. It doesn't say except in election years. It doesn't say except when government is divided. It says that you need to do your job. The people of the United States, and as a granite state, weighed in on this in 2012 when they elected President Obama to be our president and the person who made those nominations. And when they made that call, they expected the president to do his job for the entire term, as they expect Senator Ayotte to do her job for her entire term. And this is a real example of how she has been putting her party first. She said a moment ago she's been bipartisan. I just have a sincere difference of opinion about that. In her first 4 years in office, she voted with the Koch brothers nearly 90% of the time. And she's consistently stood with her party on many other issues, like saying that she is standing with Big Pharma against the negotiation of prescription drug prices by Medicare. So we just have a difference about this.
Thank you. The Supreme Court, under Judge Scalia's, with Judge Scalia on board as part of that court, the Roberts Court, has really reached out and expanded the application of the Bill of Rights to corporations, so that the Citizens United decision gave the right for free speech to, or defined or agreed to or accepted the right of free speech as being something that corporations had a right to, and that led to the ability for corporations to make very large donations for political contests. The, I forget the name of the hobby company, but
Hobby Lobby.
Hobby Lobby, thank you, expanded or made a point of emphasizing a certain amount of religious freedom on the part of corporations, so that corporations that objected to aspects of Obamacare and the coverage that would be permitted. Is that an appropriate expansion of the Bill of Rights from individuals to corporations?
Well, I certainly don't agree with the Citizens United decision or the Hobby Lobby decision, and when you think about what the Citizens United decision did, saying that corporations are people for purposes of campaign contributions, that decision opened up the floodgate of the dark money that we now see coming into our campaigns. Right after that decision, starting in the New Hampshire Senate, I led an effort to force disclosure of these super PACs and dark money groups if they were going to do business in New Hampshire. As a governor and as a candidate for United States Senate, I opposed the Citizens United decision. I would work in the Senate to overturn that. That's a difference between Senator Ayotte and myself. And I certainly would support the Disclose Act that currently Senator Durbin has proposed, something that my opponent has voted against. When it comes down to campaign finance reform, we have too much money in politics, and that decision, turning corporations into people, was a very flawed decision. And it's also one of the things that is waiting in the wings while we have a gridlocked 4-4 Supreme Court, which if the Senate had done its job and had the nomination hearings for Judge Garland, we might not be in the position to have right now.
Thank you. Former Attorney General Kelly Ayotte, could you comment on the expansion of the Bill of Rights, so those rights to corporate entities?
Well, first of all, let me just say that to hear Governor Hassan talk about keeping dark money out of the Senate race, I offered Governor Hassan what's called the People's Pledge in this race. It was a pledge that was in place between, in the Massachusetts Senate race that helped keep a lot of this outside money out. Senator Shaheen offered when she was in her Senate race. And you've seen on your TV, sure, there's lots of negative ads out there that are being pushed by third-party special interest groups that support Governor Hassan. And I wanted this race to be about our campaigns. And that's why I offered it, and I've been disappointed about this. And when it comes to making sure that we have a strong First Amendment, I think that's really important. But I think there are ways that we can work on this issue. I'm open to more disclosure, but it's got to be even-handed, so it's not one side using this as a tool against the other. And I think we could have kept the money out of this race, which would have been a lot better for the people of New Hampshire. And I'm disappointed because when you can actually act in your own race and decide how you want to conduct yourselves, I think that's the best measure of what we could have done here and really make it about our campaigns.
Thank you. It has been helpful to employment in the sign industry, though. And
TV.
And TV, certainly TV. MUR is here, and I probably stayed in the nicest room in the entire Mount Washington Valley, I think. Another question. Kelly Ayotte, what's your favorite hike or walk that you take?
Well, first of all, I love Mount Washington, so I actually, when I was younger and more fit, I actually got to ride my bicycle up Mount Washington, which was awesome in the hill climb. But at the local area, one of my favorite ways to start my day in Nashua is there's trails in Mines Falls, and so that's where I like to run in the morning, but definitely Mount Washington for a hike.
Thank you. Maggie Hassan, favorite hike?
Well, I really love the rail trails in Newfields and Newmarket, and I love walking my dog there.
Very good. Stay local with that one. The opioid problem, opiate abuse problem here in New Hampshire, obviously a massive problem. Maggie Hassan, 4 years ago when you took office as governor, the problem started getting bad then. Do you feel like you were slow getting to it, that it's only been in the last 18 months or so that you've really gotten to it? And do you think enough has been done? And in particular, sitting right here, do you think there's enough available locally in terms of resources for the Mount Washington Valley to help people who have opioid addictions?
Well, the heroin and opioid, and now we should add the word fentanyl crisis that we are dealing with is our biggest public safety and health challenge, the biggest challenge for all of us of our time. It's devastating friends and families, including people very close to home for me. We have worked to make sure that people on the front lines are getting the resources they need. It's been a comprehensive response from making sure we're strengthening law enforcement, to expanding drug courts, to getting emergency funding out the door for prevention, treatment, and recovery, including just some recent grants this week, including a grant to Carroll County for more help with law enforcement. This is something I started to work on from my first month in office when I made sure that we were sustaining drug task force teams in the face of federal budget cuts. It's why I worked so hard to do Medicaid expansion, because that includes substance abuse coverage, and it's why it's so critical that we keep Medicaid expansion in play. And then we continue to work. I proposed a comprehensive package now almost a year ago that was enacted into law by the legislature this spring. We have more work to do, to be sure. This is an issue that evolved over years. It's going to take constant, vigilant work by all of us working together to defeat, but we're going to stem the tide, we're going to reverse it, and we will defeat this thing.
Thank you. Kelly Ayotte, 68 people died 4 or 5 years ago from opioid overdoses. Now it's over 400 here in New Hampshire. What is a U.S. Senator going to do that's going to impact that?
Yeah, this is just awful. Having served as Attorney General and worked on these drug enforcement issues, I've never seen anything like this. Just the other day, I went to the store. I was going to a local store, and the woman behind the counter told me about how she lost her granddaughter, and then how her her daughter became addicted to pain medication because of the pain of losing her daughter. And the good news is that she was telling me how they got her help. And so that was a good news story about how recovery can happen. And so what I've been focusing on in the Senate, 3 years ago, a group of us came together, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and we put together a piece of legislation called the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. And we went to the stakeholders, not only in New Hampshire, but across the country to do that on the front lines of this, addiction experts, those in prevention, treatment, our first responders. And the bill was passed and signed into law this summer by the president. It passed the Senate 92-2. And in fact, it's really focusing on the best federal support. We can't do it all from Washington, but getting the help to New Hampshire and other states in prevention, treatment, and recovery. And then on the Armed Services Committee, I've been focusing on the source. It's coming over our southern border. It's being trafficked here by the Mexican drug cartels. And we need more interdiction at the southern border. So I got an amendment passed to have more resources to interdict not only heroin, but fentanyl at our southern border. And that's how we'll help our local law enforcement, not only supporting their efforts and making sure that they have what they need locally, but also going after it at its source.
Thank you. Gilead, is the earth getting warmer? Is it getting warmer as a result of human activity? And if the answer to those things is yes, what should the United States Senate and you as a senator do about it?
Well, I believe in the impact of climate change on our environment, and I feel very strongly about protecting New Hampshire's environment. And this goes back to my time as Attorney General. And so I have supported the Clean Power Plan to make sure that we protect the New Hampshire. In fact, New Hampshire, with some of the efforts it took, has already on its way to really meeting the goals of the Clean Power Plan. I really think that this issue is about who we are. Here we are in the beautiful Mount Washington Valley, and a big part of your economy is tourism. And we need to make sure that we protect our beautiful environment for all of us. So this is something where I've crossed party lines. This is something where I really believe we can work together on solutions that help us make sure our economy is strong, but also protect New Hampshire's environment. And that's my focus, and that's what I want to continue to do.
And your Northern Pass answer would be what? 30 seconds.
Bury it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a follow-up to that, though. If, in fact, the cost of burying it is such that it won't get done, would you prefer to not have it done and not have that non-gas, greenhouse gas generating hydropower come here on poles, or would you rather insist that it be done and put up on poles? There you go.
George, let me just say I disagree with the premise of your question, because I believe it can be buried. And I also believe that we heard from day one we can't bury any of it, and they've already proposed burying more of it. We know that there were projects done in Vermont where they buried the whole thing. New Hampshire's worth it. I believe if this project can go forward in a way that protects New Hampshire's environment, but if it doesn't, then it's not about New Hampshire and the value we would get out of it, because once those poles are there, they're permanent. And to me, I think that the choice is a false one, and they can do both if they choose to do so.
Thank you. Maggie Hassan, same question. Is the environment being affected by human intervention, and what would the U.S. Senate do about it, and Northern Pass?
Well, you certainly can't come to the northern part of New Hampshire and not appreciate how critical our natural resources are to who we are as a people, how we have defined ourselves, the kind of grit and determination we bring to everything we do, and it's awfully important to our travel and tourism industry too. Senator Ayotte referred a moment ago to the early efforts that were made in New Hampshire that have helped us be in a good position with regard to the Clean Power Plan, and I was proud to be a co-sponsor of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative back when I was in the state Senate. At the time, I would add, about the same time that Senator Ayotte was questioning whether climate change was real in some of her public statements. I'm very proud to have the support of the Sierra Club, who's endorsed me in this race. And I'm very concerned that Senator Ayotte talks about wanting to support environmental protection, but sides with big oil in protecting tax breaks for big oil, which is not something that we should be doing if we're really interested in moving to a clean energy economy, something I call for in my economic plan. Senator Ayotte's environmental record, she's the only New England senator to have voted against critical clean water protections, and her environmental record is actually worse than former Senator Scott Brown's. So this is a real distinction between the two of us. Northern Pass. I certainly think that the people of the North Country in particular have done a remarkable and excellent Granite State job of raising concerns about the towers that would mar so much of our beautiful landscape, our scenic views, and really impact our travel and tourism industry. And I am pleased that the company has now proposed to bury more and more of the lines. I think there is more work to do here. They should be looking and listening to bury even more of them. I think it's also critical that if Northern Pass goes forward, that New Hampshire ratepayers actually see a benefit from it. The only reason I have for not saying bury all of it is that I can think of a few places where the blasting that you would do for burial might be more environmentally damaging than the alternative, and that's why I think the site evaluation process is so important for us all to hash that out. But they certainly should be burying as much as absolutely makes sense.
Thank you.
May I respond on?
Go ahead, 30 seconds.
First of all, protecting New Hampshire's environment, going back to my time as Attorney General, where I protected the state and actually sued the EPA under the Bush administration to protect New Hampshire from being the tailpipe for the Midwest power plants. I've done the same thing in the Senate, also protecting New Hampshire crossing the Island Mercury as well to protect us. And on the Clean Power Plan, I was the first Republican in the country to endorse it and support it. I've worked with Senator Shaheen to extend the Land and Water Conservation Fund to help preserve areas we can all enjoy in the state of New Hampshire, and also on energy efficiency legislation. This issue is very important to who we are, and I believe we can protect our environment while making sure that we can have a very strong economy. They go together.
Thank you.
George?
Go ahead, 30 more seconds.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really proud to have Senator Shaheen's support in this campaign, and really admire the work that she's been able to do on a variety of issues, including the environment. But look, I just did need to point out that as a United States Senator, Senator Ayotte actually voted to block the Environmental Protection Agency from being able to control or regulate carbon emissions. So there's a real difference in her record and in mine, and I am very proud to have the strong environmental record that I do, something I want to continue in the United States Senate.
Maggie Hassan, isn't immigration reform simply a ridiculous political football at this point? Couldn't you and Kelly Ayotte go in a room together and come to some agreement about how to tighten up the enforcement of our borders and the control of our borders, and also some plan that would allow or manage or monitor the existing 11 million people who are in this country illegally?
Well, it is absolutely long past time for Washington to pass comprehensive immigration reform that starts with strengthening border security. It also means that for the undocumented immigrants that we have, they need to pass background checks, they need to pay fines, they need to pay taxes, and then they need to go to the end of the line behind people who are working through the legal process to get here. But it's absolutely essential that we take this on, that we do it in a bipartisan way, something that I am very well suited to do, having crossed the aisle not only as a state senator but now as governor, to really get things done for the people and businesses of New Hampshire.
To the end of the line for citizenship, you wouldn't be sending them out of the country.
That's correct, end of the line for citizenship.
Thank you. Kelly Ayotte, same question. Can you fix this?
We need to fix this. I supported the bipartisan immigration bill in the Senate because I want to solve this problem. And that means solving the illegal immigration problem at our border. We don't even have an entry-exit system for this country, so 40% of the people who are here illegally actually overstay their visa, and that bill obviously would have done that. And then for the people that want to be part of this country and work, and we are a country of immigrants, yes, have a better legal system that is fair, the one that makes sure it works for us and to strengthen our country. And that's why I've been a problem solver on this issue. And sometimes I take some heat from this from my own party, but I'm about solving this because I know it'll make our country safer in terms of the border security issues, and I also know it can make our country stronger. But there is a big difference between Governor Hassan and I on this issue, and that's on the issue of sanctuary cities. I do not support sanctuary cities because what those cities do is say, we're not going to cooperate with federal authorities on enforcement of the law. So you saw a beautiful young woman who was killed in California because of an illegal immigrant where there wasn't cooperation, who had a criminal background. And Governor Hassan, in her time at the state senate, actually supported sanctuary cities. So this is an area of difference, but I want to solve this immigration issue and keep the country safe and make sure we're strong.
Maggie Hassan, 30 seconds on sanctuary cities.
No, thank you. First of all, we don't have any sanctuary cities in New Hampshire. What happened in San Francisco is truly horrible and a great tragedy, and I certainly think local law enforcement should work with federal law enforcement when we find an undocumented immigrant who has a criminal history or poses a danger. But I joined Governor Lynch, as well as others who were concerned that the bill that Senator Ayotte was talking about would have meant an unfunded mandate on local law enforcement, forcing them to do the federal government's job in terms of immigration control. It is absolutely essential that the federal government step up, that this issue finally gets addressed. I am also just concerned because I do think border security is such an important issue, and I'm concerned that Senator Ayotte, who sits on the Homeland Security Committee in the Senate, has missed nearly half of those hearings, including ones that deal with border security. It's a really important issue, and we all need to be coming together, learning best practices, and dealing with it.
Thank you. Another topic that has been driven by politics as opposed to anything else is the issue of free trade, NAFTA, the TPP, and so on. It used to be all presidents, regardless of party, supported free trade agreements. It used to be that all Republicans and many Democrats supported free trade agreements. And now we have essentially every politician in the world running fast away from those agreements, refusing to support them. Are we really going to go back to Hoots-Smalley in 1930 that helped trigger the Great Depression? Are we going to build tariff barriers? How are we going to enter into free trade around the world and compete around the world? Maggie Hassan.
Well, thank you, George. And free trade done correctly is really, really important. It's one of the things I focused on as governor was revitalizing our international trade office and promoting international trade in New Hampshire. It's so important for so many of our businesses, especially businesses who are very small and don't have the kind of overhead or administrative strength to take on some of the challenges of entering the export market. But on the TPP in particular, this is an area where I differ with the president. It is absolutely critical when you evaluate a trade agreement to see if it's helping New Hampshire manufacturers, whether it's helping create jobs here, whether it is protecting workers enough and protecting our environment enough, and whether it has a dispute resolution system that actually will allow people who may think that there have been violations a real seat at the table. And when I evaluated the TPP, I found that it was failing in particular in work on environmental protections, but also it was really tilted towards large corporations in that dispute resolution process. So I can support it.
Thank you. Kelly Ayotte, same question. Don't we need free trade in the world? And the fact that other countries pay people less and are able to sell stuff here for therefore a lower amount of money, can't we compete on the basis of having better stuff than they do, making better things, being more creative and the like?
Well, visiting businesses throughout our state, I know one thing, that when we have a fair playing field for our businesses, we can compete against anyone around the world. And many of our businesses are exporting their terrific goods, what they manufacture, new ideas and technology. But we really have to look at how are we negotiating and what are the agreements that are being negotiated. And I do have, I gave the president the authority to negotiate the TPP, but I'm disappointed in what he negotiated on two fronts. I don't think the intellectual property protections are strong enough for our business, and I also don't think that they dealt directly with the issue of currency manipulation. We had some amendments that would have dealt with that in the Senate that gave that president that opportunity, so those are two areas that I see as real weaknesses in TPP. But I've also believed that if our businesses get the opportunity to compete on a fair playing field, we can absolutely build the best products in the world here. One final point, if we don't get at tax reform in a global economy where we have the highest business taxes in the world of the developed nations, then our businesses aren't going to be able to compete as well as they should be able to. And we've got to address this issue. We also have to have a better regulatory climate for our businesses so that they compete in the global economy and do make it easier for small businesses. And actually, Senator Shaheen and I held a hearing in New Hampshire of the Small Business Committee on this very issue, and we introduced legislation to make it easier for small businesses who often it's difficult for them to kind of go through these offices in the Department of Commerce to make it a lot easier for our small businesses to be able to export their great products.
Thank you. Maggie Hassan, I've done the arithmetic in my head. You have one more minute to say anything you want.
Well, I do love visiting businesses throughout New Hampshire, and we are seeing great advanced manufacturing companies expanding and growing, high-tech companies expanding and growing. Yes, they can compete with anyone. But boy, would it be easier for them if we didn't give tax breaks to companies who are outsourcing jobs, right? And so one of my differences with Senator Ayotte is I would close the tax loopholes that provide incentives for companies outsourcing jobs to places like China. Senator Ayotte has voted to protect those tax breaks. She talked just a minute ago about the difficult challenges we face with currency manipulation. She had the opportunity to do something about that in a vote in the Senate, and she declined to crack down on currency manipulation. We know that we could reform our tax code and bring taxes down, especially for middle-class families, and cut red tape and make more tax incentives available for research and development, especially for small businesses. If we didn't have tax breaks that Senator Ayotte has voted to protect for big oil, for outsourcers, for Wall Street. So that's a real difference in our outlook here. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I have to give Kelly Ayotte more time. We never leave here. I've already tested your stamina mightily. The two of you have been amazing. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. You do get one more minute for a closing statement. Let's see if they can hang in there for that one more minute. And if I remember correctly, yes, Kelly Ayotte, if you could go first, please.
Well, thank you, George. I want to thank all of you for coming here today in the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council. This race is about how we can get things done for the country. I've done that in the Senate, working across the aisle to pass bipartisan legislation to address our heroin epidemic, working and fighting for our small businesses for a better tax and regulatory environment. Because guess what? A lot of what's coming out of Washington, alphabet soup agencies are making it harder for our small businesses. And finally, keeping our country safe in a dangerous world, making sure that we stand up to countries like Iran on their ballistic missile program and their nuclear weapons program, making sure that our men and women in uniform have what they need. And I'm going to continue to fight for the people of New Hampshire. I have one of the most bipartisan records because I'm focused on getting results for the people of this state and getting things done. And that's why I'm running again. I ask for your vote, and I appreciate your attention today, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you, George, again for moderating, for all of you who are here today. Valley, Senator Ayotte, thank you for participating. You know, growing up, sitting at the breakfast table, my dad, who was a World War II veteran, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, would lower the newspaper and look at us and occasionally ask, what are you going to do for freedom today? He was serious because he was part of a generation, the greatest generation, who by believing in something greater than themselves saved the world, and then they built the United States of America into the greatest economic and military power the world has ever seen. That's the spirit that infuses our work here in New Hampshire as we work across party lines to get things done and to keep our state safe and secure. That's the spirit that should be informing our work in Washington, D.C. But unfortunately, what you see is something quite different. And what this race finally comes down to is whether New Hampshire's going to have a senator who's always going to put their interests first, work for their priorities, or whether it's going to continue to have a senator whose agenda is shaped by corporate special interests who already have enough senators on their side. I'd be honored to have your vote, and thank you all again for attending.
Just a couple more things. You can't leave yet, please, if you wouldn't mind. First, I would just like to say I've been a little bit more obnoxious in my questioning today than I sometimes am. I mean, absolutely no disrespect to two women who have my greatest respect. I think they've done a terrific job, and I think it's so cool that New Hampshire has two great political leaders who are both female and do a wonderful job here. With that, I'm going to ask Linda Fox Phillips to come up here and provide gifts, because you do not leave empty-handed from Mount Washington Valley.
This is from Ragged Mountain, and then this is from the Economic.
Ragged Mountain and Glass Graphics and the Economic Council.
My goodness,
Thank you very much, Linda.
And George.
I get something? I get free stuff? Oh,
thank you.
Yes, it'll be a shawl. I'm so old now. cover up the sweater vest. Thank you all very much. We had a wonderful time. Appreciate it.